Hadirin dipersilakan duduk. Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, kindly be seated. Ampun tuanku, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Menghadap Duli yang Maha Mulia, Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Rizwan, Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, ibni AlMarhum Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah, Al-Maghfur-Lah. Ampun tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik mohon diampun. Patik mewakili seluruh pengurusan dan warga Institut Kefahaman Islam Malaysia, IKIM, menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih di atas limpah perkenan Duli yang Maha Mulia tuanku bercemar Duli berangkat ke The Regional Southeast Asia Human Dignity Conference 2024, Dignity for Everyone, Everywhere, Best Practices and Success Stories for Building Inclusive Societies pada pagi ini. Sesungguhnya, keberangkatan Duli yang Maha Mulia tuanku akan menjadi kenangan yang manis buat patik sekalian dan sudah tentunya menambahkan lagi seri majlis ini. Ampun tuanku, patik merafak sembah dan memohon limpah perkenan Duli yang Maha Mulia tuanku untuk patik turut mengalu-alukan div-div kenamaan yang lain dan meneruskan acara dalam bahasa Inggeris. The Honourable Ministers, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and welcome to the Regional Southeast Asia Human Dignity Conference 2024, Dignity for Everyone, Everywhere, Best Practices and Success Stories for Building Inclusive Societies. Your Royal Highness, to seek blessings for this event, Yang Berbahagia Dr. Nick Roskiman bin Abdul Samad, Principal Fellow of the IKIM Center for the Study of Sharia, Law and Politics, will begin the recitation of dua.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. O Allah, we seek from you of all good things which pertains to this day and the days in the hereafter. O Allah, as you have said in the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Isra, verse 70, indeed, you have honored the progeny of Adam and transport them across land and sea and provided them with good things for their sustenance and exalted them above many of your creatures. With that spirit of karamah insaniyah, human dignity, we organize this Regional Southeast Asia Human Dignity Conference 2024. We seek your guidance and protection in making this conference a successful one. O Allah, bestow your success, guidance, help, care and protection to His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, ibni AlMarhum, Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah Al-Maghfur-Lah, Sultan of Perak Darul Rizwan, and Her Royal Highness Tuan Kudara Salim, Raja Permaisuri of Perak Darul Rizwan, His Royal Highness Prince and Princess, the Royal Family and all commoners. Allahumma aslih ummata Muhammad, Allahumma farrij ana ummata Muhammad, Allahumma harham ummata Muhammad. O Allah, improve and help the state of the ummah of Muhammad. O Allah, grant ease to the ummah of Muhammad. O Allah, have mercy on the ummah of Muhammad. O Allah, help and protect the people of Palestine, ease their pain and suffering, help those who are in need, fortify their hearts and calm them like you granted Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam's heart peace in the world. Allahumma inna naj'aluka fi nuhurihim wa na'udzu bika min shururihim. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana hadha jam'an marhuma wa tafarruqana min ba'dihi tafarruqan ma'suma. Wa la taj'al Allahumma fina wa la ma'ana wa la man yatba'una shaqiyan wa la matrudan wa la mahruman. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Amin, amin, ya Rabbal Alameen. We thank you, Dr. Nick Roskiman bin Abdul Samad, for the dua recitation. Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite Yang Berbahagia Professor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti, Chairman of the Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, IKIM, to deliver his welcoming speech.
In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, ibni AlMarhum, Sultan Azlan Shah, Muhibbuddin Shah, Al-Maghfur-Lah. Distinguished ministers and ambassadors, esteemed collaborators, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. It is with great pleasure and profound honor that I extend a warm welcome to each one of you to the Regional Southeast Asia Human Dignity Conference 2024. This significant gathering themed dignity for everyone, everywhere, best practices and success stories for building inclusive society is a testimony to a shared commitment to fostering mutual understanding and also respect with our diverse communities. First and foremost, I would like to pay tribute to His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Shah for consenting to grace this event with his esteemed presence and to deliver the royal address. Your Royal Highness, your dedication in promoting dialogue and understanding among people of different faith and background is too commendable. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to bless you and preserve His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Shah. I would also like to extend our heartfelt to our esteemed collaborators, the International Center for Law and Religious Studies, Brigham Young University, BYU, the Religious Freedom Institute, and Seminar Theology Malaysia. Your partnership and support are invaluable in making the conference a reality and also in advance our sharing goals of promoting harmony, dignity, and inclusive societies. One of the core mandates of Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, IKIM, as a think tank is to build a bridge and foster understanding among people of the different faiths. We believe that our religions and culture diversity is as a sort of God's blessing and a strength to enrich our society and the world. For us, Islam as a religious and civilization affirms that in its worldview established by revelation, for centuries, the worldview of Islam has always guided Muslims to be just towards themselves and others, emphasizing the importance of compassionate, al-ihsan, justice, al-adlu, and mutual respect, or takrimun nas. If Muslims have not been just where is in the past or present or its future, not with Islam as such, but with the Muslims' understanding of Islam. Thus, in these times of great confusion and misunderstanding, it is more important to learn that and its best representatives. Just we seek knowledge from the best scientists and minds in many fields. We must strive to understand each other's faith and perspectives from authoritative and credible sources. The approach not only fostering mutual understanding, but also has in dispelling misunderstanding and building a more harmonious and civilization society. As we embark on this journey of dialogue and collaborate, let us remember that the essence of our gathering today is to share humanity and work together towards a future where for everyone, everywhere. Let us share our best presence and also learn from each other success stories and be inspired to create the world that value and also respect the dignity of everyone individual. Thus, thank you very much for your presence and also your participation. May this conference be a fruitful and enlightened experience for all of us. May Allah bless you and may Allah bless our effort and guide us towards greater understanding. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And thank you, Yang Berbahagia, Professor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti, for your speech. Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite the Honorable Professor Dr. Brad Scharfs, Director of the International Center for Law and Religious Studies, Brigham Young University, to deliver his welcoming speech.
Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, On behalf of the foreign participants, I would like to congratulate the organizers of this important conference, Dignity for Everyone Everywhere, Best Practices and Success Stories for Building Inclusive Societies. We are especially grateful to His Royal Highness, Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, Sultan of Perak Darul Ridwan, who will deliver his royal address in a few minutes. We are extremely grateful for your being with us today, and we all look forward to hearing your address, Dignity for Everyone Everywhere, towards building inclusive societies. I would also like to thank Professor Dr. Muhammad Nur Manuti and Professor Dr. Muhammad Azam Muhammad Adil, Director General of the Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, IKIM, and his colleagues at IKIM for co-sponsoring this conference as the latest in a series of important events focusing on human dignity in Southeast Asia. I'd also like to thank Dr. Eugene Yap, Senior Fellow at the Religious Freedom Institute, located in Washington, D.C., Dr. Yap is also the director of the RFL Partnership, an organization for the promotion of religious freedom and interreligious harmony in Malaysia. We also welcome and express gratitude to the foreign participants, including students and professors from the BYU Hawaii Religious Freedom and Human Dignity Initiative, and the many other foreign participants who have traveled from great distances to be with us. Finally, I want to thank Professor Dr. Afifi Alakiti from the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies and a member of the Faculty of Theology and Religion at Oxford University. He helped organize a conference with our center on multi-faith partnerships last week at Christ Church, Oxford, and hosted one day of that gathering at the beautiful Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. He has also been a valuable partner in planning and executing this conference. I'm grateful for the theme of our conference, Dignity for Everyone Everywhere, Best Practices and Success Stories for Building Inclusive Societies. I especially appreciate the focus on best practices and success stories for building inclusive societies that are founded on human dignity for all. Often, when we focus on human dignity, at least from a Western perspective, it is easy for our discussions to become a little too abstract and theoretical. One of the ideas for this conference was to focus on human dignity from the bottom up, focusing on practical experiences and stories of how we can promote and protect human dignity in everyday lives. For the last several years, our center has been focusing on human dignity as the foundational principle of human rights and as one of the keys for building inclusive and harmonious societies. In the last year, we have published books on African perspectives on human dignity and human dignity, judicial reasoning, and the law. We are also working on book projects on Asian perspectives on human dignity and Islamic perspectives on human dignity. And we hope that some of the material generated at this conference can be incorporated into those book projects. In addition, one of my projects in the coming year is to teach a new law school course on human dignity and religious freedom storytelling. And we hope that this conference will help generate ideas that will help us move forward with an effort to inspire people around the world to follow the examples of others who have been willing to stand up for each other at times of conflict or difficulty. Our goal is to develop short videos in 3-minute, 1-minute, and 30-second versions that tell the stories of people who have stood up to defend and protect the dignity and religious freedom of others, who might be suffering discrimination, persecution, or even more dire threats and assaults on their freedom and dignity. So, welcome. I know I join many in this room in expressing our anticipation and pleasure at the prospect from learning from each other. Once again, Your Royal Highness, Sultan Nazrin Shah, thank you for your patronage and participation in this event. Thank you.
I thank you, Professor Dr. Brett Shah, for the speech. Ampun Tuanku, the time has now come for all of us to listen to your royal address. Yang berbahagia Professor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Noor Manuti will humbly invite His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, the Sultan of Perak Darul Ridwan, to deliver his royal address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. It gives me great pleasure to be here this morning and to be given the opportunity to address all of you. I would like to begin by commending the Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia for hosting this important conference, as well as the conference's partners at the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University. Mention must also be made of the Religious Freedom Institute in Washington, D.C., and the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. Yet more friends of Malaysia's from around the world conference possible. The corners of the globe highlights just how collaborative and international this event is. This conference results from the combined efforts of individual teams representing a wide range of faiths and nationalities. It is an event which, if you like, practices what it preaches, enshrining international harmony, cooperation, and inclusivity in its very origins. And this is absolutely vital if we are to spread a message about the importance of human dignity for everyone, everywhere, if we are to promote the building of inclusive societies. We live in a world where, sadly, despite centuries of efforts from like-minded individuals, inclusivity and religious freedom are not a given. Across the globe today, people of different faiths and backgrounds are stripped of their human dignity because of their beliefs in large and small ways. In some countries, certain religious groups are persecuted by governments, forced out of their homes, and even incarcerated because of their beliefs. But even in parts of the world which purport to be inclusive, minority populations often experience appalling, everyday degradations. Offensive graffiti on the wall near their home, or an insult on their way into work because of something they wear or the color of their skin. We must work to eradicate every one of these acts of aggression from the macro to the micro, because all of them, however small, represent an attack on human dignity itself. Everybody, regardless of faith and background, deserves to feel safe, respected, and included, not only in their home country, but wherever they travel in the world. That, to me, is what this conference stands for: everyone, everywhere. Standing before you today, I am proud to reflect on Malaysia's own track record in this area. Tolerance and inclusivity are core values of our nation. Ever since the declaration of the Rukun Negara in 1970, Malaysia has worked hard to promote the unity and togetherness of its diverse peoples, and it is recognized internationally for this. In 2008, the United Nations agency, UNESCO, named Georgetown and Malacca as World Heritage Sites and lauded them as exceptional examples of multicultural trading towns, commending their almost 500-year histories of intercultural dialogue and exchange. We have in Malaysia as many as 137 living languages spoken by our citizens. And we celebrate a wide range of religious festivals, including the Hari Raya Aidilfitri, Deepavali, Christmas, Chinese New Year, Wesak, Thaipusam, and many more Hari Rayas, always with enthusiasm and vibrancy. Malaysia has indeed been hailed as a multicultural success story. And I know I am by no means alone in the belief that our inclusivity, our celebration of diversity is absolutely integral to our continued prosperity as a nation. Indeed, as I have said before, and I repeat here, Malaysians of all races, religions, and geographic locations need to believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that they have a place under the Malaysian sun. Yet, sadly, there are people here and around the world who do not share in that belief. Mistrust, intolerance, these are themselves a kind of pandemic which spreads like a virus between individuals, communities, and entire nations. And that is why events such as today's are so important. In the face of hate, we must spread messages of inclusion. In the face of ignorance, we must spread knowledge. And in the face of fear, we must spread love. Where some people are viewed as less worthy and less welcome because of their faith or the color of their skin, we must promote the message that all human lives are of equal value. Here, I want first to reflect on the meaning of human dignity for everyone, everywhere, exploring theological and diplomatic perspectives on this notion. Then I want to share some global success stories which might guide us towards best practices in the areas of tolerance and inclusion. I have always believed that when we are talking about humanity, about the value of difference and diversity, real human stories are so much more powerful than numbers and statistics. And so, I am delighted that the sharing of such stories is a unique and important priority of this conference. Our event's first objective is to, and I quote, unpack best practices on how human dignity is actualized and contextualized in the lived realities within communities and society, unquote. I hope to contribute a little to this discourse on lived realities today. But first, what is human dignity? There are many different ways of answering this question, drawing on religious, philosophical, and political concepts. In Islam, human dignity is based on the Quranic concept of karamah, where God ennobles and honors human beings in the famous verse, "We have bestowed dignity to the children of Adam. وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي Adam." God gave Prophet Adam, alayhi salam, the gift of human dignity, and this extends to the entire family of Adam. In the language of the Abrahamic scriptures, it is the universal verse, God created man in his image. We thereby have a God-given duty to honor God's gift to us by affording human dignity to all other human beings. As an important Quranic verse declares, "O humankind, indeed, we have created you from one male and one female, and then we made you into different races and nations, so that you might know one another." Muslims are enjoined to embrace the similarities that unite the whole of humanity. To understand, in other words, the essential nature of human dignity for everyone, everywhere. In the field of politics and diplomacy, meanwhile, the concept of human dignity has been enshrined in tracts and treatises from the United States Constitution in 1787 to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. But a specific commitment to the protection of human dignity for everyone, everywhere, was not articulated until much more recently. In 2018, in Punta del Este, Uruguay, a Declaration of Human Dignity for Everyone, Everywhere was adopted to commemorate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 70 years previously. The Punta del Este Declaration makes explicit a belief that has always been inherent in the original 1948 text, as well as in the Charter of the United Nations, which affirms the dignity and worth of the human person and the equal rights of men and women of nations large and small. In the words of the Punta del Este Declaration, ensuring human dignity for everyone, everywhere, is the foundational principle and the key objective or goal of human rights. This two-day conference takes up that mandate, seeking to understand how we move from the vision to the reality of a world where everyone is respected and valued, no matter who they are, where they come from, or where they go. For in spite of human dignity being enshrined in world religions and international declarations, it is clear that we have not realized the goal of dignity for everyone, everywhere, just yet. Discrimination, prejudice, war, poverty, these and other harmful forces work in almost every corner of our world every single day to strip people of their essential human dignity. And it is immensely challenging to take the theory, the ideal vision of a world where everyone is respected, and to put it into practice. But that is precisely why this conference is such an important event. Here, we seek to turn words and ideals into concrete, practical action and policies. And so, in what remains of my speech this morning, I want to share 3 real-world stories of individuals who have done just that, advocating for universal human dignity and working to build inclusive, cohesive societies, not only in what they say, but also, and more importantly, in what they do. My first story, I'm proud to say, hails right here in Malaysia. Last year, at a conference organized by IKIM, the Bishop of Kuching, Reverend Datuk Donald Jude, who is with us today, recounted an incident that happened in 2010 at his church. This was a time of tension between Muslims and Christians. And on the morning of January 10, 2010, Reverend Jude awoke to see that bricks had been thrown at the church, breaking a stained glass window. When the press assembled, they expected Reverend Jude to blame Muslims for the violence. But instead of inflaming the situation, he simply responded, and I quote, "We really don't want to speculate on the incident, and we don't want to blame anybody as we don't know who is behind this," unquote. His only wish was not for retribution, but for peace. "We hope and pray," he said, "that the incident will not become worse and spread to other churches and other houses of worship in Miri and elsewhere in Sarawak." By diffusing the situation and offering a voice of calm, the church was able to continue its long-standing friendly relationship with the An-Naim Mosque located next door. The mosque and the church returned to their practice of sharing parking lots with each other for Friday prayers and Sunday services, as well as their joint celebrations of open houses during each other's holidays. Reverend Jude said at the time, and I quote, "We have been neighbors for a long time with no negative feelings but respect and brotherhood," unquote. He noted that an imam of the An-Naim Mosque had visited the church after hearing of the incident, and that the imam condemned the act of vandalism. This story holds several important lessons. Firstly, it shows us the power of religious leaders to decelerate conflicts, dousing the fires of hatred by staying true to the principles of mercy, love, and forgiveness they are at the core of all our faiths. In fact, the vital role of religious leaders is a theme that held in common by all of my stories today. But Reverend Jude's calm, open-hearted response in the face of hurt sets an example to all of us here today. Regardless of our faith or our role within it. May his actions remind us to always respond with dignity, even when we have not been treated with it. For only by being the better person can we make the world a kinder, more inclusive place. The second story I want to share hails from a little-known city between northern Nigeria, which is majority Muslim, and southern Nigeria, which is majority Christian. Several years ago, a small local Christian congregation received planning approval to build a church across the street from an existing mosque. The Christian priest, in an effort to be a good neighbor, took the architectural plans to show the imam of the mosque, and while examining the plans, the imam noticed that the steeple of the church would be higher than the minaret of the mosque. Although planning approvals had already been granted, the Christian congregation, upon hearing this, decided to lower the height of the steeple so it would be no higher, indeed slightly shorter, than the minaret of the mosque. This was a demonstration of respect and a gesture of friendship. The Christian community graciously accepted that their newer place of worship should not appear to compete with or outdo the existing mosque. A little while later, religious tensions erupted in the local area. Late one night, a group of young Muslim men marched down that same street with torches with the intention of burning down the Christian church. But the imam from the neighboring mosque crossed the street to speak to the young men, imploring them not to damage the church. He said to them, "These people are our friends." And heeding the words of their own faith leader, the young men retreated, leaving the church in peace. What I find so powerful about this story is the way that small gestures of respect and courtesy grow over the years into large acts of protection and even potential sacrifice. The priest's thoughtfulness in consulting the imam about the church plans, the imam's respectful communication of the discrepancy in the steeple height, and the church congregation's gracious response to this concern. And these simple acts of consideration are what sowed the seeds for the imam's defense of the church at a time of extreme need. We learn from this story never to underestimate even the smallest gesture of kindness or humility. The foundations of dignity for everyone, everywhere, are built on those moments when we seek to understand and value another's point of view. I just have one more short anecdote to share, this time about a Buddhist monk named Uzin Pain, who leads a monastery in Meltika city in the Mandalay region of Myanmar. In early 2013, terrible religious violence broke out in the city, all stemming from a disagreement about a bracelet purchased by a Buddhist customer from a Muslim jewelry shop owner. Where in my previous story, we saw the potential of small acts of kindness to ripple through the years, we see here how one seemingly small disagreement can escalate into tragedy. Although the matter of the bracelet was resolved by the police, local communities were not satisfied. One of the Muslim shop owner's stores was burned to the ground by Buddhist activists. And the next day, a Buddhist monk traveling through the city was dragged from his motorbike as he passed by a mosque and murdered. This brutal act ignited a firestorm of reprisals. Angry Buddhist crowds marched through the city, armed with spears and swords. Over 100 Muslims were killed, including, tragically, 28 Muslim children in a school. As the violence raged, more than 850 Muslim men, women, and children sought refuge in the Buddhist monastery led by Uzin Pain. And in spite of the religious conflict and the events of the preceding days, in spite of the very real risk to his own life, this Buddhist monk protected them. When hundreds of armed and angry people showed up at the monastery door that night, demanding for the Muslims to be turned over to them to be killed, Uzin Pain stood at the door to his monastery and refused. He stayed there all through the night, saying, "I cannot do that. If you are to harm them, you need to kill me first." And at last, the mob grew tired and went home. This is a truly astonishing act of selfless bravery. Uzin Pain did not judge or condemn the Muslims who sought shelter at his monastery by the acts of an entirely different group of Muslims some days earlier. Instead, he gave them shelter without question, and when it came to it, he put his life on the line to protect them. This story absolutely epitomizes a commitment to the dignity for everyone, everywhere. For this Buddhist monk, it did not matter that the people seeking shelter were Muslims, and that so many of his fellow Buddhists wanted them dead. To him, they were humans in grave danger, and he stood up for their right to dignity, to life, by being willing to sacrifice his own. We may not all have Uzin Pain's incredible bravery, but we can all try to follow his example in seeing and valuing the human first rather than the religious label. During this conference, I have no doubt that we will hear many more stories of individuals and groups selflessly standing up for each other in this way. I hope that these incredible real-life examples will illuminate the path towards dignity for everyone, everywhere, and teach us how to tread it. The rhetoric of intolerance and exclusion would seek to convince all of us that what is different is also lesser, a threatening, inhuman other, by telling stories like those I have shared this morning, and those that will be shared over the coming sessions. We can combat such rhetoric, demonstrating that there is always more that unites than divides us, and promoting the essential dignity and worth of the human being. I would like to end today by echoing some words spoken by the 7th Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, during his Nobel Peace Prize lecture in 2001. Mr. Annan said, and I quote, a genocide begins with the killing of one man, not for what he has done, but because of who he is. A campaign of ethnic cleansing begins with one neighbor turning on another. Poverty begins when even one child is denied his or her fundamental right to education. What begins with the failure to uphold the dignity of one life, all too often ends with a calamity for entire nations, unquote. May these words resonate with all of us, not only during this important conference, but long afterwards. May we, like Reverend Jude, like the Buddhist priest, the Christian priest and Muslim imam, Uzain Pain, strive to uphold the dignity of each and every human life in even our smallest actions. For as Kofi Annan's words emphasize, large-scale evils stem from individual acts of disrespect. And as the Quranic teaches all of us, the reverse is also true. A single act of kindness has far-reaching impacts. If anyone saves one life, it will be as if he has saved all of humanity. I wish all of you a productive and illuminating 2 days of this conference. I have every faith that the discussions that take place here will contribute powerfully to the cause of human dignity for all peoples in all places. And with that, it is my pleasure to launch the Regional Southeast Asia Human Dignity Conference 2024. Thank you.
Ampun tuanku, patik sekalian, menjunjung kasih tuanku. Let us offer a standing ovation, ladies and gentlemen, for the excellent, earnest and exceptional royal address delivered by His Royal Highness, sharing insights of real-life stories, information, and making it simply outstanding. On behalf of the organizers, I wish to convey our heartfelt gratitude to His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, ibni AlMarhum Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah, Al-Maghfur-Lah, the Sultan of Perak Darul Rizwan, for the royal address. Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure, following His Royal Highness's launch of the conference, that we will now present to you the montage video dedicated to the Regional Southeast Asia Human Dignity Conference 2024. Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite the moderator and forum panelists to come onto the stage for the commencement of the royal session, starting with Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Dr. Afifi Al-Akiti, Kuwait Fellow in Islamic Studies, University of Oxford, Professor Dr. Brett Scharfs, Director of the International Center for Law and Religious Studies, Brigham Young University, Professor Cole Durham, President of the G20 Interfaith Forum, and Mark Hill Casey, Professor of Law, University of Notre Dame, and UN Human Dignity Day Project.
Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, Ministers, Ambassadors, Muftis, Bishops, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning and welcome you all to the royal session here. We have with us three top-notch, wonderful lawyers in the world, and indeed in the presence of, I believe, 9 muftis from Malaysia, with bishops mingled together, and indeed ambassadors from across the world, in an amazing auditorium here. And if it is not because of the name Azman Hashim, I think, you can see the logo A brings to mind. In fact, for those of us who watch Star Trek, The Next Generation, you would think that this is the USS Enterprise. And indeed, in the spirit of to boldly go where no one actually has gone before, and with the wonderful speech given by His Royal Highnesses just now, and I think we're very lucky to be here this morning, in fact. And I'd like to, in fact, start off, gentlemen. This is something which, beginning, when we talk about human dignity, and we've heard what His Royal Highness said about how the concept and the nature of dignity really, it was born from a moral, religious idea. And none of you here are theologians. I'm the only one, in that field. You are all, great lawyers in your field. And I have to say that when I'm asked about this, I always think of the example of the case in the Islamic tradition. One very famous theologian, his name was Fakhruddin Ar-Razi. He's a bit like the Duns Scotus of the Muslim world, the doctoral subtilities. And he said something like this, that the human being can be either better than angels or worse than the devil. And it's an amazing statement. This is something where you could be better than angels when you become true to yourself, true to your human dignity. Or if you let down your human dignity, you can be worse than animals, because you will be like the devils in that sense. So the stories that this Royal has given us, in fact, are good examples where it is really all up to what we do and what we not only just say, but precisely what we do. So here I'd like to begin really this discussion, and gents, this is going to be Davos style, so I hope none of you have prepared anything. No PowerPoint presentations. We're going to have, frank conversations. And I'm going to be introducing each and one of you, and we'll have, sort of a lead question of 10 minutes each. And then we'll really have an open conversation, and please interrupt each other. So for those of you who watch either NBC or CNN, it's like the McLaughlin Group, and we expect that since you all come from all over the world and you're used to that. So we'll start off with our first panelist, Professor Brett Scharfs, who's obviously, your credentials, you're the director of the prestigious International Center for Law and Religious Studies. This is a center that combines both the legal tradition, but also in my field, religious studies. And I've discovered last week that when you spent time with us in Oxford, you yourself, you're an Oxford man and you're a Rhodes Scholar. So we are only Clarendon on our side, so different colors there. But Brett, then after studied law in Oxford, then went to Yale to do his JD, to get his JD, and now you're the director of the Center for Law and Religious Studies in BYU Law, and that's one of the most famous law schools in the United States. So Brad, your center has been focusing your work on human dignity, at least I've noticed for the last 5 years. Could you tell us, how this began and why, particularly in the context of His Royal Highness's royal keynote just now, why is this so important, Brad?
Well, in the spirit of His Royal Highness's talk, I'm going to begin with a story. And it was in January of 2018, and Jan Figel, who was the EU Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief outside the EU, that's a mouthful, was visiting, and we were talking about what we might do to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And he told a story that completely shifted our discussion and indeed the next 5 years of my life. He was on the phone with a minister from Pakistan, and the conversation went something like this. Hello, this is Jan Figel, EU Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief outside the EU. I'd like to come visit. And he said, can you imagine the response I got? He said, well, first, there was a long silence. And then there was a deep sucking of air. And then there was a very suspicious, what do you want to talk about? And he said, well, I'd like to come and talk about human dignity and how it's important for all people at all times in all places. And he said there was another silence, much shorter and broken with a different tone of voice. Ah, karama, human dignity. This is an important concept in our holy book, the Quran. Why don't you come and we can talk? And so he did. And meeting led to meeting, and over time they became more trustful and more candid. And in the end, he was one of the people who was able to successfully negotiate the release of a Christian woman, Asia Bibi, who had been convicted of blasphemy for drinking out of a container of water that was shared with Muslim women. And as we heard this story, we realized that human dignity had a unique capacity for reaching across divides, for opening doors, and starting conversations. And so in 2018, we held 3 conferences focusing on different aspects of human dignity. The first at Central European University in Budapest, talking about how human dignity emerged from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the role that it played. Secondly, about the many uses of human dignity. This conference was held at Oxford University. And at that conference, the metaphor of a Swiss Army knife came to the forefront of thinking of one tool with many uses. And then at our center in October that year, we held a conference on the connections between human dignity and religious freedom. And all of this culminated in a conference held at Punta del Este, Uruguay, where the Punta del Este Declaration on Human Dignity for Everyone, Everywhere was adopted. And for the last 5 years, we've been trying to amplify and develop the message of human dignity. And we've tried to do this primarily by amplifying voices that those of us in the West don't typically listen to. And so just last year, we held a conference on Asian perspectives on human dignity. This was at BYU, Hawaii, and we have some of the organizers of that conference here with us today. And then here in Malaysia and also in Qatar, we held conferences on Islamic perspectives on human dignity. And then in Côte d'Ivoire, in Africa, we held a conference on African perspectives on human dignity. And the African book was actually completed on December 10th, 2023, which, for those of you who are human rights junkies will know, was the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the UDHR. And we launched that book at a conference in Zimbabwe in May of this year. We also released this year a book published by Routledge on judicial uses of human dignity. And so what we're hoping is that we can generate momentum towards an effort to convince the United Nations General Assembly to adopt an annual day, Human Dignity Day, that will correspond with Human Rights Day, and that these two together can serve the objective articulated in the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to keep these concepts at the forefront of our minds, because we must be constantly reminded of human dignity, of human rights, of freedom of religion and belief, if they're going to be realized in our daily lives.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we next have Professor Cole Durham, who's the president of the G20 Interfaith
is fundamentally about ethics. And a lot of the work of the G20 focuses on trying to avoid future crashes like 2008. But what we've noticed over the past decade as I've been involved with the G20 is that each successive G20 country chooses its own priorities, things that stand out, and virtually always, in addition to the economic issues, there are issues that line up with things like the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, other humanitarian goals, and at their core, various ways of protecting human dignity.
Right.
And so I think one of my efforts as president of this organization, but more as a sort of someone who's able to work with leaders, religious leaders, political leaders, academic leaders, because of the importance of the G20 in terms of global impact, this is a platform that people understand. And we have been able to invite people from many other countries. I told His Highness this morning we'd love to invite him to the G20, but others from Malaysia as well. Each year, the G20 host can invite other countries to participate. And the reality is, we find that as we work globally, we have opportunities to work on many of these issues. Now, I remember an interesting example of, I remember walking into the World Council of Churches offices in Geneva one day, and they had a little altar. It was sort of an altar to the Sustainable Development Goals. This may sound a little strange, except it lined up with a very famous Christian passage from the New Testament that, and I'm not going to be able to quote this exactly correctly, but it basically says, when did we see you, the Lord? When you dealt with the hungry, or when you dealt with those who were needing clothing or had health problems and so forth. And I'm not doing this exactly, but what was interesting was that this little altar lined up with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but it lined up with basic Christian doctrines. But it was not just Christian doctrines. You would recognize these as Muslim doctrines. I mean, what's clear when you're working in this kind of area is that the religious communities have cared about some of these fundamental issues longer than there have been nation states. Right. And behind these concepts, these religious concepts, religious concerns, is really the concept of dignity. Now, we don't always call it that, but think of how we shore up human dignity. And let me just tick off some of the Sustainable Development Goals. Eliminating poverty, zero hunger, promoting health care. I've heard, and I've also heard this figure disputed, but that something like a third of health care on earth is provided by religious institutions. Right. And the religious institutions are actually better at this in the countryside than some of the major public institutions. So think of education, think of empowering women, think of some of the major environmental issues of our time, solving the climate crisis, water. Now, these are, I mean, if you thought of the sort of human rights, you would think of some of the social and economic and cultural rights. Right. But these are also about dignity in very profound and significant ways. So we have working groups that deal with trafficking, with hunger, with health, with coming out of the COVID crisis, with I could go on, but this is one of the ways that we really wrestle with human dignity. Now, in some ways, at the G20 level, you're looking at things from the top, but religious communities are uniquely strong at getting the concerns all the way down to the grassroots, to getting the water, as it will, to go to the end of the row, so that you really have the kind of impact. And one of the tragic things is all too often religious voices are not heard at the table. I've heard it said that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. This is something we're trying to avoid. We're trying to get religious voices, their kind of long-term concerns with dignity, with these practical issues, to really have an impact globally.
Thank you, Cole. And I have an intervention here from Brad.
Yes, just to put it even a little more directly than Cole did.
I'm always a little abstract.
So the religious communities are not the victims on the table, you see. So.
The minute the Sustainable Development Goals were drafted, they were destined to fail. And they will fail. And the primary reason they will fail is because there's no mention whatsoever of religion in the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is zero chance of accomplishing those goals without the participation, the cooperation, the partnership, not the instrumentalization, but the genuine listening and partnership of religious organizations.
Right.
And that is what the IF20 is trying to bring to the table.
Yeah, I think I can just add to that. The problem is that too many people think of the G20 as just a place where global leaders go to pontificate and sign off on a communique or something like that. And but the real impact that I've seen is people being attracted by the platform, coming together and finding concrete ways to set priorities and to actually do things. And that is what religious communities are good at. And we need to find ways, effective ways, that religious communities can effectively partner with government and other leaders, and that they can share their insight and wisdom, and that it can be contribute in ways that will communicate to economists and other technical people, but that will actually get all the way down to the grassroots.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm thanks to Cole for his intervention there. Thank you. And our third panelist this morning is Mr. Mark Hill, KC. Now, for those of you who might not know what KC is, indeed, it's because of the change of monarch in the United Kingdom from Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II to now His Majesty Charles III. This is the convention in Britain where the Queen Council formally has become the King Council, hence KC. And Mark over dinner last night was just saying, there should be a T-shirt perhaps printed, KC in KL. I mean, but it's just a thought in the presence of His Royal Highness, particularly given the patronage of the palace in a country like the United Kingdom with the third estate. And it's interesting that when you become a senior lawyer, we have the Bar Association here, of course, in Malaysia, just as in the UK. And perhaps we should be thinking in Malaysia, sort of an SC or something, Sultan's Council, something like that, here in Malaysia. Because, when you do become a senior lawyer, this is part of that recognition, a senior advocate. And as Mark is, of course, you've been operating in the World Court, from the Supreme Court in the UK to the European Court, etc. What I like to, if I may, Mark, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, and see where you can stand the test of trial in this case. I know that you've been working very hard in persuading the United Nations to adopt, as Brad mentioned earlier, a UN Human Dignity Day. Given there are already, I think many days already in the UN calendar. I can think of a couple. There's, I looked it up this morning. There's the UN, Radio Day. There's a Radio Day. There is a World Seagrass Day. There's even one World Tourism Resilience Day. What has tourism have to do with resilience? I'm not going to ask you that. But of course, you even, of course, have the famous UN Human Rights Day, which is on the 10th of December. But what would adding a UN Human Dignity Day, make any difference? I mean, especially now we have too many UN days. So, as the great advocate from Britain, I'd like to hear your case. I'm not much of an advocate.
Come here and have the tables turned. I will do the best I can as an independent witness to withstand this harsh advocate I'm facing.
Here.
What we're not saying is by dedicating one day of the year to human dignity, we ignore it for the other 364. That's far from the ambition, because it's abundantly plain that human dignity is something which strikes at the very core of the human. It's something that we live with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and throughout the year. So those who say it's merely symbolic to create another day are missing the point entirely. Life is rich with symbols. Symbols carry meaning, a far deeper meaning than they might in other ways. And what lies behind our desire to dedicate one day of the year when the public at large can reflect upon human dignity is because it keeps it constantly in the forefront of our thinking and in the forefront of our priorities. Not just at a high-level governmental way of thinking, but at a much lower level, grassroots way of thinking, in places of worship, in the family home, but most especially in schools and other places of education. Because this is a long-term goal. The goal is to create educational materials which can be linked to Human Dignity Day, whereby in classrooms of every school throughout the world, the next generation who are going to be responsible for world peace, world security, and all else that runs with that, will be made fully aware that human dignity is a priority. Now, I've been teased by the fact I'm a lawyer, and by the fact I'm a human rights lawyer in particular. Human rights are a wonderful thing. They were created in a formal way under the Universal Declaration, as we've heard, in 1948. But like anybody who's reached the grand old age of 75, they get a bit tired and lethargic, and they need to be reinvigorated. And what we have behind our thinking with human dignity is not to supplant or replace human rights, but to augment it with a fresh way of thinking, a fresh way of dialogue, and a fresh way of interrelating one with another. Because there is one underlying problem about human rights. Rights are by their nature asserting oppositional difference between the citizen and the state, or between one citizen and another citizen. Rights are realized through litigation in courts and other tribunals. And the very nature of litigation is that it has a winner and a loser. One side always loses out when human rights are asserted and matters are taken to court. The distinction and the new way of thinking with human dignity is that there can be no losers. Everybody benefits by the assertion of human dignity, because as the title of this conference makes abundantly plain, it's human dignity for everyone, everywhere. Properly construed, properly interpreted, properly appreciated, human dignity makes us all winners. And let me say a little bit about the progress so far in relation to United Nations Human Dignity Day. A year ago, we had a hugely successful conference. All good things start in Oxford, and that's where our conference met. A huge amount of international goodwill. And we're building a small coalition of countries that will be in the forefront of pushing the matter forward at a universal human rights level. Firstly, we've done so through the Commission on Human Rights is based. But now the momentum has moved to New York. To New York, which is the structural base of the United Nations organization. And what we need to have is a core of nations who are committed to the promotion of the United Nations Human Dignity Day, not as an end in itself, but as a means to promoting thinking and action on human dignity the world over. And having heard His Royal Highness the Sultan speak this morning with such energy and such passion and such commitment to human dignity as a vital force within civil society, nothing would give me more pleasure than for Malaysia to be in the forefront of that core team of nations, pushing within the UN situation to bring this dream into reality, to make United Nations Human Dignity Day a reality for everyone throughout the globe. And I hope that message can be carried home.
Well, you know, really, your robust defensive opposition is unassailable, particularly once you've cited His Royal Highness. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to open up, in fact, for, you know, questions and also, you know, from the floor. And I think this is, you know, really a wonderful occasion, the opportunity for us to particularly engage. So I've been made to understand that the organizers have, you know, microphones on this side as well as that side, you know, to that. But while we wait for a show of hands, in fact, I'd like to ask particularly now with the three of you, and we, you know, as I said, this is free flowing, please interrupt whenever. Given what Mark has said just now, I mean, what are the main challenges of, in this case, the human dignity project in the face of the language of human rights today? I mean, you know, it's a very well-established tradition by now. I mean, there are challenges, clearly. And I thought maybe Brad, Cole, Mark, I mean, you know, come in on that. It's
So, Your Royal Highness, allow me to share a story.
Yet another story. Very good, yes.
When the drafting committee was comprised in 1946 and 47 to begin the drafting of the UDHR, there were 18 countries represented. And it was very representative of the world at that time. There were only a little less than 60 countries in the United Nations. And you can't draft a document with 18 people around the table. So they created a drafting committee made up of 4. Right. And the drafting committee of 4 could not draft a document. It was too controversial. And so they asked the secretary, John Humphreys, to create a draft. And he did. And it was 480 pages long. Now, those of you who are familiar with the UDHR, it's 30 brief articles that you can print on one side of one piece of paper. How did we get from 480 pages to one page? The answer is human dignity. When the process ground to a halt, it was the Chinese delegate, P.C. Cheng, who said, recall the preamble to the United Nations Charter. It speaks of human dignity as being the foundation of human rights.
Right.
And with that, the logjam was broken, and the drafting process became much more constructive. And if you look at the first paragraph of the preamble to the UDHR, the first thing you will find is a reference to human dignity. And if you look at the first sentence of Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the first thing you will find is human dignity. Human dignity and human rights are the different sides of the same coin. They can't be separated one from another. There's no desire to replace the human rights architecture. We have human rights institutions, we have human rights councils, we have human rights committees. But my fear is that human rights is a little bit like a big, beautiful, high church cathedral with no one in the pews. And what human dignity has the doing in our divisive, politicized, polarized world is to play a role similar to the role that it played in 1947 and 1948, generating consensus and agreement that resulted in a document that on a rainy night in Paris, on December 10th, 1948, was adopted unanimously by the countries of the world. And so human dignity, we think, needs to play a role in our political moment that is in some ways analogous to the role that human dignity played when the cold winds of the Cold War were really about to place the world into a deep freeze.
So maybe I could pick up on a word that Brett mentioned, and that is polarization. I think if there is one factor going on in the world that we're living in that is standing in the way of a lot of positive things happening, it is the increasing polarization. This is political polarization, media polarization. There are all kinds of forces pushing us further and further apart. When we really started thinking about what really started us thinking about things in the first place that led to the meeting with Jan Fiegel and so forth, was this problem of polarization and how we respond. And one of the things we realized is we needed we couldn't just sort of enter the trenches and enter the polarization slinging with everyone else. We needed to find some overarching concepts and some overarching things to do. So one of the really important things is that the idea of dignity is something, it's admittedly a concept that all kinds of forces in our world are trying to capture and mobilize, but there's something about it that if you are trying to work for dignity, you can't just work for your own dignity.
Right.
You have to work for other people's dignity as well. And at the same time, and let me jump from that to my work with the G20. This is what I find happening with the platform is everyone knows that there are multiple. Pluralism is a really understated word for the plurality of the religious world. But one of the things about the G20 that happens is we can bring people together and identify some priorities about which a lot of people agree, and that we can actually find ways and have the experience of religious communities so that they're not contributing to polarization, but there are some ways that they can work together and help come out of the polarization. And these are things that our world deeply needs.
Indeed. No, thank you, Cole. Mark, yes,
well,
your intervention. Yeah.
I'd just like to add what I hope is a helpful analogy in that we talk about peace builders and those who are responsible for resolving disputes. And these people and institutions exist at every level of society, from the very lowest communitarian level right up to international organizations. And they have various means and methods of building peace and resolving conflict. What the concept of human dignity, as explained in the Punta del Este Declaration, can be, is an additional part of the toolkit used by those who are building peace and who are bridging divides in society in a way of bringing people together. Because as Cole has rightly said, it's not your own dignity that matters, it's the dignity of those you disagree with. And if a resolution can be found which acknowledges and maximizes the human dignity of every individual, then it's far more likely to lead to an enduring and lasting resolution than dealing with something in a purely legalistic way. Human dignity is not intended to supplant human rights. As Brett has said, they are born of the same mother, they are twins. They will always be interlocked and mutually supportive. But by changing the dialogue, by focusing on human dignity, I think together we can move mountains.
Thank you, Mark. Indeed. I thought now I saw a couple of show of hands there. Is it Tan Sri Azman? Oh, bring the microphone down, yes. That side. Tan Sri, you're not here. Yep. There we go.
Actually, I was just trying to meditate like this. And, but since
this is it is providential question in this case. Welcome, Tan Sri.
Actually, I come from the world of finance. And as the distinguished speakers were speaking, and of course the royal address, on the subject of dignity, I can't help but reflect the issue of debt, actually. And I think when debt is overwhelming, I think it has an inverse relationship with dignity. Certainly from my tradition, the Islamic tradition, I believe there is a saying that I think the worst worry is the worry of debt. As we know, debt has gone astronomically high. I note, Brett, you did some work at Yale. I follow the work of the late David Graeber, who eloquently wrote the 5,000 years history of debt. It has now reached where the G20 and others, indeed G20 was formed from the mother of all debt explosions, the Lehman crisis of 2008. And I think an approach to human dignity, we need to reflect. It's all and well. I don't think any of us can argue about the karamah of human dignity. The issue is what is the obstacles, the kemunkaran, the munkar that sits between us and human dignity.
That's evil, by the way, munkar.
Munkar, the evil in between. And therefore, to us, and I believe Dr. Afifi, it is not symmetrical to do good and to remove an evil. To remove an evil is more meritorious because it blocks the doing, the thinking and the doing of good. And I would submit that one of the great meta blockers in our age today is indeed debt and the financial condition. Just wondering eminent speakers, your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah,
so you've clearly put your finger on one of the huge problems. I would have to say in G20 settings, dealing with the debt crisis is probably one of the biggest priorities. And this is not to say that anyone has an instant answer. I think finance ministers of all the G20 countries are wrestling with this. And what people are particularly wrestling with is countries like a lot of African countries who are sort of need some kind of debt relief. I know we have a session coming up focused sort of by one of the leaders of the Jubilee movement in the United States, which is linked with the Vatican but other religious denominations, and a reminder that in some ways, sometimes we have to find ways of alleviating debt. And that's certainly one of the recurring voices coming from religious communities. But it is clearly one of the huge problems, and it's one that everyone is wrestling with and no one has total answers to.
And in the context, in case the audience is not familiar with the concept of a debt jubilee, it's really forgiving debt, I think, to take that out.
What I would add is that human dignity is not an algorithm that really helps us solve problems. What it is it's a source of illumination, which helps us get in a better mindset for solving problems. So whether it's the debt crisis, whether it's the treatment of refugees in refugee camps, whether it's what we do in prisons, whether it's how we run schools or hospitals, if we look at these problems through the lens of human dignity, it's going to help us focus our problem solving in a way that is going to be quite generative, just as it's helped solve the drafting of the UDHR. It wasn't a magic pill. It was sort of a lens and an illumination that made it possible to solve the problem.
And I think that's the genius of it, like in His Highness's speech. I mean, it's Adam's gift. And you go back to it whenever you kind of start getting lost in your ways in that respect, Brad. Yeah.
And one thing I love about that Muslim perspective, and I had never understood this until my Muslim friends explained it to me. In the Quran, dignity is a gift that God gives Adam and to all humankind. And what we do when we extend dignity to each other is we emulate God and try to extend the grace and the goodness to others that He has extended to us. And that idea of dignity as a gift is something we don't capture, for example, in Immanuel Kant's philosophy of dignity.
Thank you.
But when His Royal Highness was speaking, he spoke of the micro and the macro in relation to this. And it's not merely international debt that we need to look at. It's about the capacity of everyone to have the dignity of being able to earn a sufficient wage to put food on the table and a roof over their heads. Human dignity impacts at every single level of society.
Thank you. A dignitas in Latin, and having a dignified life. Now I see, we have an Oxford man here. Thank you. This is a BCL graduate from Oxford University, Daniel. I remember him from Samni University here in Malaysia.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. My name is Daniel Abdul Rahman. I'm the Vice President of the Oxbridge Alumni Society currently.
I did not know that, by the way.
Okay. And I'm representing the Asian Strategy and Leadership Institute. Now, if I may say that, I would be remiss not to mention that the greatest affront to human dignity is currently happening before our eyes in Gaza. Hunger, famine, diseases, denial of humanitarian aid perpetrated by the Zionist Israeli government. Despite this and ICJ pronouncements, as well as those by various UN and humanitarian agencies, the affront to dignity continues. And I know while we've spoken about many positive things and so on, quite many great examples, my question is sometimes many of us feel very helpless. So my question to the panel is, what can we do at an individual, communal, and national level to give these people who are not getting their dignity, dignity. Thank you.
We start with Cole. You spoke about the SDG God just now with the 17 attributes, 17 sifat. So maybe from Geneva.
Well, needless to say, this is one of the most acute problems, and you know, however we felt on October 7th or 8th when things that first started triggering this happened. I mean, the ongoing outrage is really very problematic, and the idea that that you can't have a that you can't have a peace or broker a peace because that would be giving up and letting the Hamas win or whatever. I mean, we're way past some of those issues. Now the difficulty is in part a political one. You know, you mentioned the World Court decision and so forth. I was talking to someone just before we started today, and one of the difficulties is some of these things. I mean, the decision saying that the occupation of Palestine was not lawful, and it's an opinion that goes back to 1967. So this is not something new. This is a huge problem, and it's escalated. It's taken on probably worse dimensions than any of us can remember in our lifetime, and yeah, it may be worse than the debt problem, although I suspect it will end sooner than the debt problem. I have no instant solutions. But I think we need to find ways to remind, and I think there are powerful voices within Israel. There are powerful voices on all sides saying that this really needs to be brought to an end, and we need to find a solution that will respect dignity.
Let me say something about the second part of your question, which is how do we avoid hopelessness? What can we do in our own little place? Let me share a story. So there was a Christian congregation that was trying to move a big the chapel into another room. And there was a lot of discussion because it was very heavy and it was very hard. And there was a lot of ideas that were shared. And finally, a very elderly man in the congregation said, let's gather around the piano and lift where we stand. And I love this little image of lifting where we stand. Each of us feels quite powerless. Each of us perhaps is quite powerless, or at least most of us. But there is something each of us can do. And what we need to do is identify what that is for us. For me, as a law professor, it's working in an academic lane, and so it's trying to work as an academic. For a religious leader, it's going to be slightly different. For a student, it might be slightly different again. But I love this idea of each of us doing something to lift where we stand.
Thank you.
And yeah, can I also perhaps, developing the theme from this morning, share a story? And I think many in this room will be aware that in the United Kingdom, from where I come, in recent days, there has been unrest and rioting and looting on the streets of many cities, the cause of which is not entirely clear, but in many opinions, it's not unrelated to the Gaza situation. And I heard on the BBC a woman living in the city of Sunderland in the north of England talking about the rioting that had taken place the previous night and how this had been an enormous shock and disruption to the community. But what she wanted to focus on was the hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers who had taken to the streets the next morning to repair the damage, to rebuild the broken walls at the mosque where rioters had crashed them down. And she said, I'm doing this because as a member of the community of Sunderland, I want our city to be known throughout the world for peace and for love, and not for the outpouring of hatred. So it may be an easy answer, and it's not meant to sound trivial, but what matters more than anything else is that we continue a respectful dialogue. Because if we retreat into entrenched positions and stop speaking, there can be no future.
Indeed. Well, right. Well, I mean, it's just sobering thoughts even. Well, one final question then. The microphone was almost making its way around to the, yes, we have indeed.
Thank you, distinguished panelists, for speaking to us today about human dignity. I have a rather simple question to ask, really, out of the plethora I've come up in my mind. We've heard about people having to work for others' human dignity. So how can the United Nations or any formal or informal organization help improve human dignity globally if there are countries unwilling to listen and these countries restricting much access to human dignity, but with, I think, the reason being behind this most likely being due to fear. So how do we solve the problem of fear itself, especially to help all these people?
Thank you. Right. No conflict of interest, but it's guys wearing a mini UN tie there from Abingdon School. This is a schoolboy, by the way, question, so they're warning there, Brett. I mean, cool.
So one of the things I agree with, part of the problem of polarization is a problem of fear. And that is one of the things that we have to wrestle with. You know, I think my sense is we look for places where we can lift where we stand. We look for practical things that can be done. I'm conscious, like in the G20 context, we're focusing on things like trafficking. This is a huge multi-billion-dollar issue, but we need to find practical ways to cut off some of the problems, to identify some of the supply chains that seem to make this scourge continue. So that's an example of an area where their impact is possible. The issue on finding solutions to sort of debt issues at macro levels, but also having that trickle down. I mean, I think that's very significant. Dealing with extremism, with hate speech, again, we can do what we can to counter that when we encounter that in our own lives or our own communities. There are no easy answers, but I think we need to find sort of large institutionalized ways of responding and smaller micro individualized ways of responding as well.
Thank you, Cole. Mark?
When a young person stands up and says they have a simple question, it normally means there's an impossible answer. So I think nothing fuels fear more than ignorance. And for a lot of people, it's indifference or ignorance that motivates their actions. So for your generation, you need to engage in the most active dialogue as possible with people who are different from you, because it's learning and exchanging experiences that dispels ignorance, dispels indifference, and brings communities closer together. So do what you can. Our future is in your hands.
Yeah, the last word, Brad.
And I would just emphasize what Mark said earlier about United Nations Human Dignity Day. It's not an end in itself. It is something we hope to create, and then it will be up to us to do something with it. So it's a way of creating an occasion, as Mark described it, a symbol for focusing our attention so that in our various spheres of influence, we can remind and amplify the message of human dignity.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Cole. Thank you, Mark. And indeed, Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, alas, all good things must come to an end. But we are, of course, you know, in summing this up, I can think of in the Muslim tradition, we have to learn to rise from above fear over to love. And as His Royal Highness said in his speech, in the face of fear, we need to spread more love. In the face of ignorance, we must spread more knowledge. And I think this is a wonderful context in which we want to end this royal session. And we are, in fact, as His Royal Highness mentioned earlier as well, the fact that we have in our audience, you know, His Eminence, the Bishop of Kuching, somebody who, in fact, you know, in the face of the fears of the community and what he actually did for his community, there is an example where we can all particularly learn from. You know. So we're very proud, Bishop, that, you know, at least you've provided us with a Malaysian examples across His Highness's global examples there. Wonderful. I mean, Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the end of this royal session. Please let us all give a very, very warm Malaysian thanks to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Dr. Afifi Al-Akiti, our exceptional moderator, for skillfully guiding our conversation, and the esteemed panelists whose insights have enriched our discourse, broadened our perspectives. Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of the opening ceremony. On behalf of IKIM, I wish to accord our highest gratitude to Your Royal Highness for gracing the Regional Southeast Asia Human Dignity Conference 2024. Ampun tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik, harap diampun. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, kindly remain seated for the photography session before the departure of His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, the Sultan of Perak Darul Rizwan.